Heidi Hanna has a PhD in holistic nutrition. She is the most sought after speaker in the American corporate world, keynote speaker on brain health, nutrition and exercise. She is a New York Times best-selling author. She has published 4 books, the last of which is called Recharge, which is the topic of tonight's conversation. And I'm particularly delighted to be introducing Heidi tonight because our collaboration with her is being extended to the point where she's now using our My Brain Solutions platform that assesses, trains, and monitors the brain to increasingly look at the proof points, at the evidence of what really works. And as you know, the basis of this club is the focus on what works, and of course, serious fun. So over to you, Heidi.
So hello, and I'm thrilled to be here. This is actually my second time at Brain Club. I was here before speaking about a previous book I did called Stressaholic, talking about stress in the brain. But this latest book is really a passion of mine because it's all about how we manage what I believe is our most valuable resource, which is our energy. And it really is looking at energy management from a brain perspective. So I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be part of My Brain Solutions. And I personally have been using My Brain Solutions for a long time, but we're really stepping up our game with my company, Synergy. My company is based in San Diego, and we primarily focus on corporate wellness solutions that are integrative and based on brain science, brain health, brain training. And what we're starting to do now is actually be able to utilize My Brain Solutions assessment and do some research and see what's actually working and start to tailor our programs to not only the corporation, which we've been doing for a while, really understanding corporate culture, but actually the individual as well, which is really exciting because there's nothing people want more than to really understand specifically for their brain pattern what's going to be the most effective. So in my books, a core that I keep going back to that I wanted to share with you is this idea of energy management. Certainly when I tell people that I'm an energy coach, they have a lot of thoughts about what that might mean. So I like to tell them right away, it's nothing woo-woo. This is actually stuff that we can measure. I like a little bit of woo-woo with my science, but we try to integrate all those systems in a way that's actually measurable. And what I like to ask people, and I would ask you, those of you who are here with us and those who are watching the video, is how often we find ourselves with all of the information about behavior change and yet find it difficult, if not impossible, to do. And from someone who has been teaching this content for about 15 years, I found myself stumbling through that time and time again. I know what I should be doing and I'm not doing it. So the analogy I look at for that is looking at the difference between the heart and the brain. And that the heart acts kind of like a CEO of an organization, to put it in kind of corporate terms. A CEO is connected to values and passion and mission and really drives the core motivation of the organization. And that's great, and it's important, and we spend a lot of time training that. But you can really want something and yet find it. I mean, how many of you in here have decided that you wanted to go on a diet or work out, and you knew exactly how to do it, and yet struggled to actually implement that? My guess is really intelligent people. So we've got a personal trainer in the room who's admitting that that's difficult for him sometimes. So we can access the information, we can know that we want to do it, but what I found typically pulls us off course is a under-energized or undernourished brain capacity. So I think about that from a simplistic standpoint of the brain operating like a CFO. Its primary job is to analyze how many resources it currently has and how many of those resources can go to changing behavior. And so in the morning when our willpower is strong, it's pretty easy to make change. Our diet is perfect, and by the evening we don't care anymore because we've been giving out energy all day long. And if we're not replenishing that strategically throughout the day, it's very difficult for our brain to operate effectively. So a lot of what I focus on then is how do we create sustainable behavior change? It's easy to motivate somebody and have them connect to their purpose and feel inspired. It's difficult to get them to change behavior and keep that behavior change over time. So when I talk about integrative neuroscience, and last time I was here, Savannah actually introduced me as an integrative neuroscience integrative neuroscientist, and I haven't let it drop since. I'm referring to myself, and it's beautiful because people say, well, what on earth is that? When I think about integrative neuroscience, what I think about is physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, social energy, and how that impacts the brain, and how we can access coherence between all of those systems, and how we can utilize training to do that, and how we can essentially assess it, train it, and monitor it, and see in people how those energy shifts are starting to happen. The challenge is that most people that I work with are experiencing what I call a human energy crisis. This is what happens when there's not enough energy in the tank for all of the demands that are out there. So just from a physiological perspective, we know that around the age of 30, our energy capacity starts to decrease. Cognitively, studies have shown that that starts to decrease at the age of 20, which is kind of scary because, as far as I understand, it takes up until the age of 20 for the brain to fully form. So it's just finally figuring out its flow, and if we're not really utilizing it strategically in ways that help us move in the right direction, the brain will follow the same pattern as the body, which is use it or lose it. So we can strengthen certain things, but certainly other capacities will atrophy unless we're strategically training them. So this is something I just like to remind people. Around the age of 30, as your energy capacity is diminishing, the demands on your energy are probably increasing. And so what we see now, especially with our aging population, is what we refer to as the sandwich generation, where people are not only taking care of children, but they're also now taking care of aging parents, and they're in the workplace. So the demands on their energy are extraordinary. The good news about this is that we can train to change this. We can strategically give a certain type of stimulus, just like muscular growth, where we train with stimulation and then add the necessary recovery. And so for most peak performers and most corporates that I work with, they understand the stimulation part. They get that. They want to do more all the time. What can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And what's really difficult for me is that I have to teach them to do less. Because I believe pretty deeply that what we're missing is the recovery model. That we're constantly giving out energy in all of these systems, and we're forgetting to give ourselves time to recover and repair. So looking at my backstory, I was a college softball player, and I was a pitcher. So we had a limited number of innings that we could pitch before we knew we had to have recovery time. And I think about the same thing when it comes to our brain capacity, that many of us are overtraining certain capacities of the brain without recognizing it. We're tearing ourselves down, and that's where a lot of the chronic stress response is having an impact. But we're not allowing ourselves time to recover. And I think a lot of that is because it's very uncomfortable for most people to actually take it easy. So I'll say jokingly, taking it easy is hard without practice. It's because we've gotten used to going at such a rapid pace. So I believe we need to train the brain to be able to relax more effectively, which is really what the recharge idea is about. Is that it's not just sitting back and doing nothing, but actually intentionally doing training that's designed to slow the system down, practices where we start doing things like heart rate variability, deep breathing, positive emotions, things that we know are going to bring the system back into balance and really connect the brain and the heart into a circuit that's going to be more effective and more sustainable over time. So I'm going to actually ask you to follow along, and for those people who are watching this recorded, you will have access to the same handout. But you all have handouts in front of you, and on the back side of the handout, you'll see a line. So the first couple of images are just reminders to you of these concepts of the heart versus the brain and integrative neuroscience, or that synergy energy management model. But then on the back side, you'll see a line. And there's 5 bullet points that I want to go over here fairly quickly. And those 5 bullet points are what I believe are your optimal moments throughout the day to actually recharge your system. And it's pretty simple. It's common sense stuff. But if there is anything I've learned in teaching this for about 15 years now, it's that common sense is not common practice. So we have to map this out, see what we're doing, and see where we can make shifts that don't put the brain into a fight or flight response because the change is so drastic, but gently nudge our brains into a more energy efficient way of doing things. So I'm going to go over what those 5 points are with you now. You can jot them down if you want. By the way, these are also what the core of the book is about, is walking readers through this exercise of plotting out your own energy management and your oscillation, and then giving some recommended shifts to make that oscillation more effective. So I just want to say really quickly, I know most of you know what oscillation is, but if that's a new term for you, when I think about oscillation, I think about the human system. Everything is designed to oscillate, from heartbeats to brain waves to blood sugar. Everything is supposed to go like this. And if you think about the way most people live their life from an energy management perspective, they get up in the morning and they go and go and go and go and go and go, and they flatline. And then they're confused as to why their energy is running out or why they can't fall asleep at night. The only way you can sustain a flat line of performance is using stress hormones or things like caffeine or other stimulants to keep your body up in an unnatural state of energy. The only way to have optimal energy that's sustainable is truly to create that oscillation of the ups and downs. So looking at that handout, the first data point that I like to ask people to write down is when they go to bed at night. So under the line where it says PM, I'd encourage you to write down your typical bedtime. And by the way, bedtime is when you actually make an effort to go to sleep, not when you lay in bed and check email or browse Facebook. So you're consciously making a choice that I'm attempting sleep. Whether you fall asleep or not, that's kind of a longer story. So you've got your typical bedtime. That's going to be data point number one. Data point number two then is what is your typical wake time? Now this may seem really obvious, but believe it or not, with busy people, I have to get them to write this down because many of them can't figure out why they're not getting 8 hours of sleep, but they're not allowing themselves 8 hours to get sleep. So that's the first fix right there, is if you're not allowing yourself at least 8 hours of sleep, the easiest thing to adjust for most people is not what time you wake up, it's what time you go to bed. So when you see a bullet point there for number one is bedtime. It's not only the time you go to bed, but the habits that you integrate into what we would call sleep hygiene. So what are you doing to prepare your brain for sleep? Getting into bed, crawling into bed with your phone next to you is not really preparing your brain to be in an ideal state for sleep. So I recommend at least an hour before going to bed, trying to disconnect from all technology, coming up with habits that are soothing or calming, doing deep breathing exercises, aromatherapy. A lot of these are the kind of recharge strategies that I refer to in the book, and I think we'll discuss a little bit more when we open up for conversation, is what are the specific things that are going to help you to wind down and go into sleep more effectively. The second thing then is what are your morning rituals? So not just what time are you getting up, but what is the first thing you're putting into your brain? Because at least what I've seen, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, but the brain is really most receptive to new information and the most flexible after a period of rest. So if you were to get sleep, and hopefully you're getting the type of sleep you need, your brain in the morning is really susceptible to adjustments. And if you think of most people's routine, the first thing they do is check email, turn on the TV, watch the news, read the paper. And when I ask people the percentage of positive information that comes from those sources, I get anything from 5 to 3 to 1%, which makes me feel really bad for those people that their email is that negative. But most people are getting kind of fight or flight producing stimulation if they're checking into technology right away, as opposed to first thing in the morning, getting some physical movement. Doesn't have to be intense, but going for a walk, spending time in nature, doing some deep breathing, some meditation, reading something inspirational. It's my favorite time to read something inspirational, first thing in the morning. I don't even think about my to-do list or what I need to do in the day before I think about who I want to be when I show up for the day. And I think that's an important shift because it then allows us to show up in a state that's more effective for the things that we want to do. So first 2 points are what I call the bookends to your day, your bedtime prep time, your morning rituals. And then the last 3 are really your shifts or your oscillatory moments throughout the day. Number 3 would be nutrition. How are you nourishing your system? So the easiest rule of thumb for that is that you're eating light and often and eating balanced. So without even getting into details of specifically what nutrient composition you need, just knowing that you're getting a steady supply of glucose to the brain, that you're eating at least every 3 to 4 hours. You've got snacks that are balanced to tie you over between meals, and that you're not eating to the point where you feel full, because we know in that case you're probably overdoing it, which can put your body and your brain into a stress state as well. So that consistent nourishment. And so with that line, what I'll encourage people to do is actually map out when are you feeding. And ideally you'd be eating within an hour of waking up, even if it's not a full meal, but you're getting something into your system to get metabolism going. and then cycling that throughout the day. Number 4 is physical activity or movement. And so this could be exercise. We know that exercise is really good for the brain, especially interval training. Aerobic interval training will stimulate a chemical in the brain that's shown to increase neurogenesis in the brain. So that's awesome. We love that. But for a lot of people, they go and they do their workout and then they sit all day, which compromises circulation. So what we really want to encourage people to do is move at least every 90 minutes. My recommendation is every 60 minutes. And the reason for that shift is that the higher the levels of stress, the more often we need to be moving to keep optimal circulation. And so if you're in a low stress situation, you could probably move every 90 minutes to 2 hours. But if you're dealing with higher levels of stress, you want to oscillate actually more often, at least every hour, which ties into number 5, which is really taking mental breaks. So when are you shifting out of your logical, analytical, thought processing mode into something that's more creative and reflective and enjoyable? What are those shifts for you? And for everybody, it's different. So easy things for me have been, probably my most favorite has been music. I have a playlist called a recharge playlist for myself, depending on the mood that I want to trigger. It could be uplifting and stimulating, or it could be inspirational, or it could be relaxing. But having a clip of music that's 3 to 5 minutes is a perfect amount of time to recharge at least once an hour. And another one of my favorites is intentional humor. So as Phil knows, I'm part of a group called the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor, where we actually study the benefits of humor. My focus is really looking at the impact of that on the brain. And we know that humor, finding something funny, actually decreases cortisol levels and improves creativity and cognitive flexibility. So just by doing that. Now, what I find funny, you might not find funny. We tend to find some of the same things funny, not all of the same things funny. But it's good to have a humor buddy like Phil, or like Evian, or like Savannah, or my friend Karen, where you can share things back and forth. And just that little hit of the endorphins you get from finding something funny can give you a recharge boost. I would say the key with all of these things, again, is that they're common sense, but the idea is coming up with a plan and a training program where you're going to actually make an effort to create these gentle shifts throughout the day and have a better oscillation. So my challenge to all of you, and again, anyone who's watching the recording, is to choose one shift that you would incorporate right away. We've had a lot of conversations today about, is it 1, is it 3, is it 5? How many things can we really take on and sustain when it comes to behavior change? And I've found pretty clearly that 1 is always best. I'd rather have someone do 1 thing and do it well than try to do 5 things and not find it sustainable. And again, the more challenge people have, the more energy they're putting out, the more time that they feel like is constrained, meaning they feel like there's a lack of time, the more important it is to really isolate one factor at a time. So that's kind of the recharge model that I use. And I want to go through just a couple of other points before we take some questions. What I call the brain recharge process, and we've been talking about this quite a bit today as well, is a simple way to really get the brain into an optimal state by balancing brain chemistry, building brain health, and boosting brain power. And this is what I've long referred to as cognitive fitness or brain-body fitness. Getting the brain into a relaxed state, being able to really supplement or nourish brain cells so that they're more effective by giving them the nutrients they need through a brain health program, and then creating a training program that's going to optimize or boost brain power strategically. So just a couple of highlights on this. I think balancing brain chemistry is one of the most important things, and from a scientific perspective, there's really nothing that I can think of that's been validated more than meditation, deep breathing, visualization, really trying to tap into the relaxation response to bring our brain chemistry really into a better balance. When we're flooded with cortisol and stress hormones, we can't think clearly, and we've seen that a lot of damage is done to both the brain and the body through chronic or sustained stress. So this is really finding some sort of solution that works to decrease the rate that we're doing things and slow things down. And I'm going to talk about some of the tools I personally use to be able to do that. The second thing is building brain health. And so a lot of what we've talked about already in this oscillation are part of building brain health through nutrition, physical activity, stress management, sleep, social connections. And we're talking about now an integrative program where we can actually take some of these things along with My Brain Solutions, training solutions, to really provide a kind of richer, deeper training program for people, whether it's in corporate or it's an individual training experience. And then the third thing that I've really simplified, but I'm happy to say it's been validated in a lot of our conversations today, is when I think of boosting brain power, to make it simple for people, I put it in similar terms as physical fitness. So most people are aware that physical fitness has 3 key capacities: strength, flexibility, and endurance. And in my perspective, the brain requires those same 3 capacities. So when I think about brain exercises or brain training or brain games, I'm looking at what are the capacities we're enhancing. Is it our focus in the moment, which to me would be a strength of a brain, being able to be fully present in the moments that matter most, something that's very difficult for most people to do. The second thing is cognitive or mental flexibility. Are you able to think outside of the box? Can you be creative? Can you respond to different situations? Can you be positive in a stressful situation? Most of us are dealing with stress all the time. And if we let the stress take over and our negativity bias take over, we're stuck when it comes to our cognitive options. So that flexibility is really important for how we manage our energy. And then the last thing is endurance. And just to personalize this a little bit, part of why I got into studying the brain is that I've had 3 grandparents with Alzheimer's disease. I also have a history in my family of mental illness and substance abuse. And so when I think of the sensitivity of the brain and what can happen, it became really important for me to think about how I could create a brain that's going to be sustainable over time. I not only want it to be really sharp and present moment focused with you all right now, I want to make sure I can do that for the rest of my life. And so looking at endurance, a big thing that showed up for me in my work is looking at a sense of purpose. And the research that shows that people who connect to a sense of purpose on a daily basis actually have longer lifespans. It gives them a reason to stay engaged and a reason to continue to generate energy. So looking then at training solutions, and specifically My Brain Solutions has been the training solution that I've integrated. There's 2 factors that have played a role in my work and our work moving forward that I'm super excited about and want to share with you quickly. The first, and I know it's not a real clear image up on the screen, if you're watching the recording you'll be able to see a little bit more clearly, is the assessment. So I've utilized this. This had personal meaning for me. I actually went through a process of having my brain scanned and understanding more about my brain and how it works. And being able to see these 4 different functions and all of the key capacities of the brain helped me understand things that were over-functioning and things that were under-functioning, so that I could have a clear picture of what I was trying to decrease activity, which areas of the brain really needed to calm down, and which areas actually needed to be more trained and stimulated. So it became very personal for me, not just a one-size-fits-all approach. And then I could reassess and see how my training was being effective and see what changes I needed to make to my solution. So this is something now that we offer to all of our clients. And I'm thrilled to say I'm in the middle of a study where we're looking at successful entrepreneurs and looking at their brain-body fitness scores and their key capacities to see where those imbalances might exist. I know I'm not supposed to be biased when I do research, but I am, which is good. I'm not analyzing the data because things that I expect to see, and I'm already starting to see in the feedback from the entrepreneurs, is very, very strong cognitive abilities, but some challenges when it comes to resilience, stress management, social connections, and actually negativity bias, which is one of my favorite things to study. I think negativity bias can make top performers good at what they do because they have almost a heightened sense of alertness to what could go wrong, and therefore they can be 10 steps ahead. By the way, I have one of the worst or best, depending on how you look at it, negativity biases I know, and yet I'm one of the most positive people I know. So it's not that this shows negativity. In my opinion, it's a stress sensitivity. And so the good thing is that people who are successful may have a heightened sensitivity to stress. The bad news is I think it also causes them to burn out at quicker rates and causes them to struggle more with some of brain imbalances that I mentioned before, like anxiety, depression, and substance abuse, which I am seeing in that population at pretty scary rates, actually. So I'm excited because I also think these are the people who oftentimes are the thought leaders in our communities and will take this type of program back to their companies because they'll see the impact for themselves as leaders, and then they'll want to integrate that into their company. So based on the assessments we're doing then we're able to provide customized training. This is the My Braining Solutions platform and how we're using it. The language we're using, again, is looking at this brain-body fitness, strength, flexibility, and endurance. So just examples for my personal training program, and a lot of my clients will ask me, okay, so how do you do this? It's like a 30-minute program. I spend 30 minutes to an hour training my body. I spend 30 minutes to an hour preparing my brain. I think both are equally important if you want to be sharp throughout the day and really show up in the moments that matter most. So for me, what that looks like is a calming activity. So I do deep breathing. I'll use my Calmbeat app, or I have some other technologies that I'll use to do some deep breathing, heart-focused breathing exercises. Then I will actually do some specific positivity training. I'll write down things I'm grateful for. I'll come up with a positive mantra, and that's going to be my flexibility training. And for me personally, the last step is always my favorite, and that is adding some mirth, which is just another word for humor. So I go find something funny. I look for something funny. I ask people for something funny. I have a list of 300 of the funniest videos based on research that we've done on our website, which is called Beyond Funny. This is a passion of mine. I've started a nonprofit to provide healthy humor resources because the challenge, and we talked about this a little bit today, Evian, is that when you're in a depleted state, that is not the time to figure out what you need to be able to recharge. You're exhausted, so you're not going to be creative and have the best ideas. That's why I want to create a toolkit for people when they need to recharge, that they can just access this toolkit and have tools like we have here with my Calmbeat, but also have funny videos to watch, or also have aromatherapy blends that might be enhancing to different energy states. So to me, it's how we pull all of that together, help people train that in a way that's going to be sustainable. And so that's really all I have. As Evian mentioned, I've published 4 books. He has 3 because the other one, honestly, I kind of tucked under the rug for a while because it seemed a little bit silly, but it's resurfaced because a lot of people are interested in it. And I'll share with you real quickly the concept. It's called Relax Your Fat Off. And it doesn't mean you can lay on the couch and lose fat, as wonderful as that sounds. But I do believe the most important factor to sustainable weight management is learning to relax and decreasing the stress response. So I talk in this book about why stress actually causes the brain to want to store fat, and how even if you're losing weight, if you're not doing it strategically with a relaxation training program, the likelihood of you gaining that back is very high. The other thing I'll just mention quickly is that another element of the training that I do I'm really excited about is we're doing recharge retreats at Canyon Ranch, which is a great facility for us to host that, where we're actually getting the right nutrition, the right movement, fitness, environment, nature. And we're going to be utilizing a lot of the training tools and the assessment so that people can come spend 3 or 4 days with us, learn how to recharge utilizing these tools, create a training plan to go home with, and then access My Brain Solutions training platform when they leave so we can assess how that's going for them. Good? Good enough? So there's some things to think about. Thank you. That's a lot of notes.
So while we're waiting for questions to be collected, I have a couple, and I'm sure that Evian has one. And that is, I'm going to pick up on your last statement when you number 5, you said take mental breaks.
Yes.
Is that 30 seconds? Is that 2 minutes? Is that 4 weeks?
Great question. That's a great question. So what I typically encourage people is that as much as we can think about our day as a series of sprints instead of a marathon, we're going to be better off. The more mental breaks that you take, the shorter they can be in length. And I believe the more impactful they'll be. So if you're going for longer periods of time, you probably need a longer mental recharge break. Sometimes there's circumstances you can't avoid where you're in back-to-back-to-back meetings. And if you feel like that means that you can't take a break or it's not worth the effort, that's where I think people lose those sustainable habits. So it's really a constant evolution. So I think about literally mapping out your energy as how much energy are you having to put out, and based on that, how much recovery do you need? The other thing is to be able to monitor the amount of recovery we get and the fact that we can become better at recharging in quicker time. And so the reason I say that this was always a real struggle for me, going out of town and traveling and jet lag and speaking and doing things that were really outside of my comfort zone, it used to take me days just to recharge. And what I've learned for me is most effective is actually a shorter period of time, but a higher intensity, meaning, I realize not everybody can do this, but rather than extend recharge for several days, I take one day, I take it completely off, I go get a massage, I make sure I'm doing what I can to nurture my brain and body at the same time. And so it's almost like interval training. I'm getting really intensive recharge in one day that then enables me to go back out and put energy out back into the world at a higher level. So I don't know if that makes sense. I think it's not really one size fits all. Just for an hour-to-hour basis, I usually recommend 3 to 5 minutes. So for every 50 minutes of high performance time that you want to have, I recommend you take 10 minutes off, 3 to 5 minutes for some sort of mental break, getting some physical activity, maybe having a snack, and trying as hard as you can to make that gap 5 to 10 minutes max, but even 3 minutes could be effective.
So I have a question. One of the things that we're shocked by in looking at the brain database we have is that there's 85 billion neurons, highly interconnected neurons, and yet we all seem to, or many people seem to have this broken record of repetition that gets consolidated. We have these non-conscious biases. Change is such a threat to the brain, it's really hard. So you suggested that maybe doing one thing is the way to circuit break and show the brain that it can get this dopamine and then share with oxytocin with others. In your experience, what has been the single most consistent thing that people can change?
I can tell you the most difficult, probably my negativity bias. I can tell you the hardest thing for people to change is to take breaks. And I think that's because of addiction. I think we get literally neurochemically addicted to stress and stimulation. So when we start to slow down, it feels uncomfortable. So I know that's the hardest. I think the easiest things for people are almost the more, bless you, tangible, like go on a diet. Like I can eat better. It doesn't mean it's sustainable, but I can eat better if you give me a plan because I'm going to use my motivation and willpower for a certain period of time to go on a diet or working out. It's always like doing something different and creating a habit around that is easier for people than undoing or not doing and calming down.
Okay, we have a couple of questions here. Let me just take a moment. Okay, so this is first question is, if our energy does indeed oscillate and I miss the opportunity to relax during a depression, going down, what should I do?
Yeah. That's another, it kind of goes back to, again, how much you want. So energy is always going to oscillate. If we're not taking the breaks, what ends up happening is this stress response that's going to give us energy for a period of time. The biggest challenge is that that's not sustainable over time. So we can override basically missed opportunities by kicking out some stress hormones temporarily and get through that moment, perform at decent levels, and be fine. You can then replenish that. I think the bigger issue is not just what happens if I miss it once, what happens if I miss it every day consistently over a long period of time, is that's when you start to see actually hormonal chemical changes that are difficult to repair. In fact, we talked about this a little bit today, that if you recharge consistently, you only have to recharge to jumpstart your system. If you miss recharge for too long a period of time, you now have to reboot your system, if that makes sense. So there's an actual corrective process, and I'm undergoing some of this right now when it comes to adrenal fatigue or chronic fatigue or even depression and anxiety. A lot of times that's a kind of a deeper chemical imbalance that we need to more strategically try to re-nourish and repair. And in my book, Stressaholic, I talk about that. What does that corrective process look like to repair the system from the damage that has been done from chronic stress? Versus what we're kind of talking about today is, let's say we're not at that point yet, how do we just get a natural oscillation pattern back again? And so one of the things I'll mention on that, kind of how to know where you are with that and how to shorten that cycle, is we tend to look a lot for symptoms of burnout or symptoms of fatigue. So exhaustion, depression, anxiety, those sorts of things, foggy memory. And what I try to encourage people to do is look for the signs that show up before the symptoms so that you can circuit break more quickly. So what is the smallest thing that you can notice that tells you your system is out of balance? And then how do you prioritize recharge so that you can nip it in the bud before it becomes a symptom? So my example would be when I experience severe fatigue, I actually get very depressed, and it's frustrating to me because I hate being tired and I hate being depressed, because that's just not who I think that I am. It doesn't fit my framework. Before I get to that point, though, I get a little headache right here in my prefrontal cortex area. It's trying too hard to filter out some of the noise. It's working too hard, and I literally feel like my brain is cramping. To me now, that's become a sign, just a very subtle headache that comes on that says you're overriding your natural oscillation now. This is going to become problematic before it gets to the point where I'm calling my parents and saying, I don't want to do this anymore, it's too hard. And so if you can circuit break it there when I have the little headache and I can say I'm going to do my calm beat, or I'm going to write down things I'm grateful for, or I'm going to make sure I get extra sleep, you can actually stop it before it becomes symptomatic. That was a really long answer to that question, but I hope that there was some nuggets in there that made sense for whatever your questions might be.
Well, I think this is a superb last question. This is our last question, and that is, where does alcohol fit into the relaxation
Right
plan?
now, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can it? Just a short
Was this your
answer.
question?
No, it's not. I wish
Okay.
it was. Is it a short circuit to a relaxation process, or is it actually a stressor? So if you can give us just a short circuit
So
answer.
I'm gonna answer my answer, and then I'm gonna, if we have time, maybe even see if one of you have an opinion on this. It depends on who you ask. So I believe that alcohol in moderation for someone who can tolerate it well is perfectly fine. I've had periods in my life where my energy was so depleted that alcohol was too toxic for me to tolerate, meaning it threw me into a hypoglycemic state. It caused me to be dehydrated. It totally impaired me the next day. So when I go out and I do speaking engagements and I'm traveling and it's a lot of stress, it's not negative stress, but it's just a lot of energy needs, a lot of energy output, I minimize or completely eliminate alcohol because my system is not resilient enough to handle the toxic effect of alcohol. And I don't think anyone can debate the fact that there is a toxic effect of alcohol. I think if you have a resilient system, then you can have alcohol in moderation, especially if you have it with a meal that has protein, so you slow down the glycemic response. And I actually taught a class to financial advisors about how to drink strategically. If you're going to do it, here's how to do it and minimize the negative side effects. Because the reality is that many of them see that as part of their business and entertaining. And if you say, in order to have a healthy brain, you can't drink anymore, that's no job security for me. I'm never going to be asked to speak again. So I think it's all a matter of perspective, but I'd love to hear, from a lot of the brain experts I talk to, neuroscientists and some that come to mind quickly, they'll say no matter how you want to spin this, it's still toxic for the brain.
So I'm actually going to sign up to the How to Drink Strategically class. But actually, what I'm not going to answer that because we've got some other things going on this evening. So I'd just like to say thank you once again for being here and for entertaining us and providing with a great